Next on KQED Newsroom, the latest plan for two massive tunnels to take water from the Delta makes waves up and down the state. As Pope Francis is named Person of the Year by Time magazine, a conversation with San Francisco's Archbishop on the state of the Catholic Church. Plus, the anniversary of Newtown and another school shooting this week. Can hackathons reduce gun violence?
We're looking to get solutions or proof of concepts of products that tackle subjects such as trauma, isolation, the prevention of violence in youth.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. As 2013 comes to a close, California may have seen one of the driest years on record. Wildfires flared across the state. Yet managing the state's water supply has long created controversy, pitting environmentalists, farmers, and voters against each other. This week, state officials released the latest plan for the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. The Delta supplies drinking and irrigation water to much of the state. It's also home to beautiful wetlands and wildlife. The current $25 billion proposal, backed by Governor Brown, would build two massive tunnels to move water from the north to the state's more populous south. Proponents say it will also save the Delta's endangered species. But critics are calling the plan a costly water grab and have vowed to block it. Joining me now for a closer look are Lauren Sommer, KQED science reporter, and Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer. And Paul, let me begin with you. The draft plan was released this week. What are some of the key points and what has the reaction been like?
Well, the plan is pretty intimidating to a lot of people who are just sort of casual news observers. It's 34,000 pages. Now, that's, wow. You can't even get your mind around that. But it really boils down to a couple of basic facts in California. 2/3 of all the water, the rain and the snow, falls in the north. 2/3 of the people live in the south. And so for the last 75 years, we have basically figured out how do you move water from north to south. We've built the world's greatest system of dams, canals, and pumps. Right. And in doing so, we've allowed agriculture to bloom. California is the #1 ag state in the country. We've allowed Silicon Valley and Hollywood to bloom. And we've also had a big downside. We've killed a lot of the salmon. We've wiped out a lot of endangered species. We now take 50% of all the fresh water that flows into the Delta from rivers all over the state, from the melting Sierra snow, and we divert it to cities from San Jose all the way to Los Angeles and to all the farms. And this plan is an attempt to say, how do we make that water more reliable and also take it in a way that kills fewer fish? The idea is you build two huge tunnels, 30 to 35 miles long, 40 feet high, and you basically pump the water out from a different place. Instead of from giant pumps near Tracy in the south part of the Delta, which grind up and kill a lot of fish, they would take it further north near Sacramento. And that's the basic idea.
So what has the reaction been like? Lauren, how have environmentalists, for example, been responding?
Yeah, you might imagine this is a really controversial plan, and there's people all over the state, different constituencies that have very different takes on the whole thing. The big question about the environment is what's going to happen to these endangered fish species? The context is they've really taken a nosedive in the last few decades, and these fish, a lot of people are saying we got to figure out a way to bring them back. So what will happen is that the wildlife agencies, federal and state, are going to have to look at this plan and say, well, what is this going to do? Is it going to hurt these fish or help them? They actually have to give a permit to this plan before it would ever get built. And the question right now is, well, is this going to take more water out of the ecosystem or is it going to take less water out of the ecosystem? If it takes more water, a lot of these environmentalists and some wildlife agencies are saying, you know what, that's not going to help these endangered fish. So how much water it takes is going to be a key question going forward.
You know, people often think that because of California's growing population, it's people who are sucking up all the water and needing all this water, but that's not really true.
No, it's a great question. You know, the old sort of saw in Northern California is that Southern California is taking all our water to water lawns in Hollywood. And in fact, Farms in California use 80% of the water that people use in California.
80%?
80. We have 38 million people. And 10% of all the water goes to those 38 million people. Another 10% goes to all the businesses. 80% goes to the farms. So
and is
really,
that water used efficiently?
Well, it's in the eye of the
water.
beholder. The farmers say yes. A lot of environmental groups say no. Basically, there are plenty of places in California where the farmers have been conserving and using water efficiently. There's also a lot of places where they haven't put in drip irrigation. They haven't lined canals with clay to stop water evaporating. And, you know, they haven't managed their groundwater very well. All through the San Joaquin Valley, they're over pumping, and basically a lot of environmentalists are saying instead of this plan, what you should do is develop more local sources of water, more conservation, more recycled water, where you use treated wastewater to irrigate golf courses and things like that. But this has shaped up in the past to be a north-south water battle. We had the same kind of plan on the ballot in 1982 called the Peripheral Canal when Jerry Brown was governor before, and it failed because Northern California overwhelmingly voted no.
Well, I think what's interesting in the conversation this time around is people are really talking about climate change. We have the snowpack here in California. That's where our water comes from. And with climate change, we may not see the same snowpack that we're used to. So I think it's kind of been an interesting element in the conversation now as opposed to in the 80s, which is what's our water supply going to look like going forward, and will it be reliable?
And this system is massive. It serves millions of Californians. It sounds almost wonky, but because it serves so many people, is that why people should care? It directly affects people's lives.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand why this one little place plays such a pivotal role in the entire state. I like to think of it as kind of a train system or a subway system. There are lines going all over the state, but it's really what happens in this central place that matters. And 2/3 of Californians get at least some of their water from this place, including in the Bay Area.
So what happens if the tunnels aren't built? What happens with our current system?
Well, right now, the question about endangered species isn't just, environmentalists who like little fish that you haven't heard of wanting to save them. The Endangered Species Act is the most powerful federal environmental law in the United States. And basically you cannot kill endangered species. So if these pumps are grinding up salmon and smelt and other fish, and we're taking too much fresh water and disrupting the habitat, judges have ruled, and also federal agencies have ruled recently, that you can't pump as much water. So it's directly incumbent on the farmers in the cities to also figure out a way to not kill all these fish, because in the end, the Endangered Species Act is not going away. And if there isn't a plan, then it's probably going to result in less water being pumped out of the Delta. The fish may not recover. The question is, are there ways to use the water more efficiently? The other big question is, this is $25 billion. Who's paying for it, and how do you pay for it? Right now, they're still in the planning stages. Jerry Brown hopes to break ground in 2017, but none of the money is in hand. Zero of the $25 billion. Water districts in the Central Valley, in the Bay Area, would raise rates on ratepayers to pay 2/3 of it, and the rest would come from a state water bond or bonds and the federal government. But kind of like high-speed rail, they have none of it basically in hand.
High-speed rail, another boondoggle. I'm curious.
I didn't call it a boondoggle.
Okay, I did. I'm guilty of that. Well, you said 25 billion, but opponents are saying it may be more like 50 billion, the environmentalists, and they're already threatening lawsuits. Will this thing ever be built, do you think, or is it just going to be tied up in the courts for years and years and years?
If history is any indication, will it be more expensive? Will there be lawsuits? It might be a pretty safe bet to take. I mean, the state is in a really tough position because the water districts will be paying the $17 billion to actually build the tunnels, the construction costs. They're going to want assurances. They're going to want a certain amount of water and to know that water is going to be delivered. And then you have these wildlife agencies, environmental groups saying, you know what, you can't take as much as you've been taking. So the real key question is, if any of these water districts or agencies say, there's no way we're going to put up this money if we get less water, and one pulls out, the whole thing may fall apart at that point.
And Governor Brown is pushing this really hard. His father, Pat Brown, when he was governor, started the State Water Project. Do you feel like Jerry Brown now feels like this is his mantle to carry the legacy forward? Yeah,
I think there are three reasons why he's pushing this so hard. The first is that he saw his father build big things, the state university system, the State Water Project, highways. And second is, a lot of people say California can't do big things anymore, and he wants to prove them wrong. Third, just in the political calculation, unions want this, just like they want the high-speed rail. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs that would go for decades, and they're pushing hard for it. His biggest supporters are unions. They funded his campaign. They funded Prop 30, the tax that he put on the ballot a couple years ago. And in politics, they say, dance with who brung you.
And so what happens now? There's a public hearing period?
Public comments for the next 4 months.
Okay.
The state's going to look at all of those. They're going to do another draft, which maybe will be released in a year. And then all the permits start and all the other big questions. So it's a really long road from here.
And environmentalists will certainly sue and probably put it on a state ballot to try to block it as well. And you're going to hear the echoes of 1982, North versus South, in that state ballot. The question is, the people who want this have a lot of money, and they'll try to get it through.
All right, we'll see what happens. And I have a feeling we're going to hear more and more about it in 2014, well after the holidays. All right, thank you both to Lauren, Summer, and to Paul Rogers. And coming up later in the program, how hackers can help reduce gun violence. But first, big news this week as Catholics around the world cheered the selection of Pope Francis as Time Magazine's Person of the Year. In words and deeds, the new Pope is signaling a distinct change in tone for the Church, stressing modesty and concern for the poor while rejecting an emphasis on social issues like abortion and gay rights. So how is the new tone playing out with local church hierarchy? Tonight, we hear from Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone. The native San Diegan was selected by former Pope Benedict last year to lead the San Francisco Archdiocese. Cordileone is a conservative in one of the state's liberal bastions, leading a flock from Marin to San Mateo. Scott Shafer sat down with him earlier.
Archbishop Cordileone, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, the Pope has certainly hit the reset button a bit, and he's gotten a lot of attention. He's really kind of rejecting the pomp and circumstance in a way that comes with his position, focusing on poverty. What has surprised you the most about Pope Francis?
As I reflect on it, I think it's the power of his personality. His real personality comes through the media, and that's why I think people feel a real connection to him. He certainly is very close to the people in his style and the things he does to reach out to them. But even beyond that, he has this power, his personality, to people feel connected because what you see in the media is what he's really like in person.
He's warm.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether he is simply setting a different tone or if there's something bigger going on. And I'm wondering, what do you think? Some have even said that what he's already done just in these first few months has been revolutionary. What's your take?
In a sense, I would say it's been revolutionary because people are taking a different look at the Catholic Church and they're kind of rethinking things through. I think he will
What do you mean by that?
That maybe there's more to look at than they had originally thought. Maybe they had an impression of what the Church is like and what it stands for, and they see something different in Pope Francis that is not really different, but he's bringing out certain aspects of what we're all about that people maybe never realized before. And he has it's not just because his teaching is very effective, but it's who he is. He really lives it in his life. Like you said, rejecting so much of the trappings of the office and living a much more simple life.
One of the things the Pope has said is that some church officials have become obsessed, or they're too obsessed with divisive social issues, abortion, contraception, gay rights. Do you agree with that?
I think he's cautioning us to become too obsessed with them and focused in on only one issue. These are really big issues. They are issues we need to talk about. He himself talks about them. But when he says he doesn't want ideologue pastors and ideologue bishops, what I understand him to say is that we're convinced of the truth of what we have to share. We think it's going to benefit. But we don't approach a situation by trying to impose this on people without any kind of a human relationship. We don't. The main thing, the first thing, is to encounter the person, to know the person,
not to
have
judge.
A relationship of love. Yes. We have something we want to share, but it has to come out of a relationship, not out of an ideology. I think that's what he's calling us to do. How do we best interact with the world? I think we have a treasure we believe is worth sharing with people, but how do we do that? It's not in an ideological way, but it's in a human way, to love the person.
Yeah, you know, there was concern when you got here that because of your past with your support for Proposition 8, that perhaps you would be out of step with your flock. This is the most liberal part, or one of the most liberal parts of the country. And I'm wondering, what have you done to sort of reach out, especially, say, to the gay community, which had particular concerns when you were named Archbishop? Mm-hmm.
I think when we don't interact with each other, we can make decisions or get images based on stereotypes, and that happens on both sides. People on my side of the marriage debate can see mean things that are happening to people that are standing up for marriage, and they can paint with a broad stroke. But when we interact, we understand that a lot of times, people have suffered because they have this orientation. They've been disowned by their families, they've been harmed, and they want to come to a place that will accept them for who they are and affirm them. So it tenderizes us, and that's how we can have a human relationship. And we're not going to change each other's minds, but we can live together in a human way because we love each other as brothers and sisters, even though we have this sharp divide. Immigration reform now seems kind of stalled in the House of Representatives. Why is it important in particular to your flock, to Catholics, that this get done? This particular issue is one that's very close to the heart for Catholics, though, because, well, of course, just about all of us are immigrants in this country, but that experience is much more recent with Catholics. Just about all of us are either from those who immigrated from Southern and Eastern Europe 100 years ago, or those who have more recently immigrated from Latin America and Asia. So it's an experience that's very close to us, and we know people caught in the situation. There's also the sense, a spiritual sense, in that our church has always been multicultural from the very beginning for 2,000 years. So we understand living together with different cultures and how we can live together and enrich each other. And there's even a deeper spiritual sense that I would say immigration is sort of a metaphor for who we understand ourselves to be spiritually. We as believers are not at home here. We're on a pilgrimage. We're kind of immigrants trying to immigrate to our homeland of heaven. There's the deeper spiritual reasons, but also some very practical and principled reasons about justice, and something that's very close to us. Yeah. Final question. I know you're a big sports fan. This is the last season for Candlestick Park. I know. And the 49ers are going away, but there's talk of maybe having a last event with the Pope, Pope Francis. Have you heard anything about the Pope being invited to come to San Francisco? Someone mentioned that to me recently, who's high up in the 49ers organization. Oh, really? So is there a possibility? I don't know. That's the only thing I heard of. It certainly would be really exciting. I did meet him briefly when I was in Rome at the end of June, and reminded him that we're the only archdiocese that bears the name of St. Francis. So maybe it'll happen. All right. Well, Archbishop Cordileone, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
And now an unusual approach to preventing gun violence. On the eve of the one-year anniversary of the Newtown massacre, yet another shooting at a school in Colorado made headlines. Programmers and entrepreneurs will gather in San Francisco this weekend to discuss high-tech solutions to reducing violence in schools. The event is organized by a group called High Ground Hackers. And joining me now is co-founder James Colgan. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Julie.
As I mentioned, another school shooting today, this time in Colorado, where a student targeting a teacher injured two fellow students before committing suicide. In fact, this is just a day before the Newtown massacre one-year anniversary. And there's been at least one school shooting roughly every 2 weeks in this country since Newtown. What's your reaction to that epidemic of violence, and how can your group address that?
That's actually what got the motivation to me to actually start the High Ground Hackers with my co-founder Michael Selvage 1 year ago tomorrow. It was actually the school shootings in Sandy Hook and the outrage of that atrocity. And so looking towards high tech, we look for the scenarios and the situations where prior to a violent occurrence happening, we can look at bringing help to the individuals, or when a violent situation is actually occurring, we look to better aid those people that are involved, such as the police, such as students, such as teachers.
Can you give some specific examples? Are you targeting, like you said, police, but also mental health workers, students? How can an app help a mental health worker, for example?
Let's break that down. So we've got an application that was developed just a month ago, actually, by a group called Concern. And that is an application that is being used in communities communities, or will be used in communities and by students, where they can reach out to trained medical professionals when they're experiencing a mental health situation. We have another application where they actually have a community that is observing, or they're in class and they're tracking their own moods, and those moods are being recorded. They have a network of friends that are associated or related to that individual, and the application will send out an SMS message to their friends saying, hey, you know what, James is feeling pretty down right now. Maybe he's suffering from depression. That's already been logged. And friends actually reaching out to maybe an isolated individual saying, hey, do you want to go out and do you want to play a game of basketball? Breaking cycles like that, helping people with their own mental health issues, connecting mental health professionals to situations where they can actually help. That's really what we're all about.
And that's interesting that you bring up the whole point about breaking the isolation, because many times high tech has been blamed for creating isolation, that young people are more in tune with their iPhones and their devices and their online social networks instead of actually talking to each other. But you don't seem to think there's a contradiction or a problem here.
It is counterintuitive, but the reality is it's best to work with a trend than try to work against it. And the trend is definitely to be more connected to your network, to your friends through these apps, or through your iPad, or through your iPhone and smartphones. So knowing that that's a reality, how do we use that to work with a situation? So you've already got a network of friends that are connected with an individual. Let's reach out to those friends to contact that person individually to help them with a situation.
And your group started just in March, but you've already had 2 hackathons. Did any actual apps come out of that are in use now, and is there any evidence that they actually work?
Yes, there is actually an app that's out there being used by an organization called Cure Violence. That was one of the top 50 NGOs in the world. It was started by an epidemiologist called Dr. Gary Slutkin. And the Cure Violence organization, they send interrupters into violent situations in areas of, say, Chicago or other areas of violence to break up a cycle of violence. Our application, developed in the first hackathon, is used to make those interrupters more efficient, get them out to the places of where violence is potentially occurring in a more timely fashion. The next phase of that application is now to do the same thing, but for medical response. So we're trying to help people to interrupt and stop violence, but if violence has occurred, we need to get medical assistance there ASAP. So the app is going to do double duty in that sense.
How did your group start? You apparently got big backing from Ron Conway, a prominent angel investor in here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. He's invested in companies like Google and Twitter. How did all of that come about?
It all came about when Ron Conway started the Technology Committee for the Reduction of Gun Violence. That's where Michael and I actually met. And a number of programs have spun out from that organization. Michael and I went off and literally, in San Francisco fashion, went to a coffee shop and we said, you know what? The complexity and the variety of different challenges that are out there in American society today, it really needs a number of different applications that can target specific situations. It's perfect for a hackathon. The challenge is that these situations and issues are extremely esoteric, and so we needed to pull in subject matter experts to bond and join the teams of developers, and that's what we do that is unique with the High Ground Hackers. So we get researchers, faculty members, people that are expert in situations, and they embed in a developer team in very tight loops, and they can, within 36 hours, put together a very effective proof of concept application.
And you have another hackathon coming up, and when will that happen, and where, and who are you expecting?
So we've got such a draw for speakers. We've got 22 speakers who are going to be there tomorrow at the Twilio headquarters, and we're going to be talking about everything from gaming changing behavior, neurology and neuroscience, and we've got, after those speakers have actually spoken, we'll be recording all of that, and then in the new year, we're going to be having a hackathon where developers are going to be coming in, they're going to be bonding with the subject matter experts, they'll have the videos to go off, and we'll be hacking in the new year on applications based off of what we're doing tomorrow at the symposium.
Well, very fascinating. James Colgan, thank you for joining us on what has been a sad day with the Colorado shooting, but it's been a very illuminating discussion, and I wish you the best of luck with your project.
Thank you, Tui.
All right. And one final note on all this, this weekend a hackathon aimed at engaging African American youth is also taking place. That's happening in Oakland. It's called Brothers Code. And And Scott Shafer joins me now for a discussion of some of the stories coming up. And with school shootings once again in the news this week, we have a gun-related action that's coming up in the South Bay.
We do. You may recall, I'm sure you recall, last month voters in Sunnyvale overwhelmingly by 67% passed Measure C, which did a number of things along gun control lines, requiring the guns be locked up in the home, requiring gun store owners to log all their sales for several years, and also limiting the size of magazine rounds to 10 or less. And on Tuesday, the NRA is going to be filing a lawsuit in federal court, basically saying it violates the Second Amendment. And they've been sued already in state court by a gun store owner, but this is a continuation of that, really attack on that Measure C.
And in fact, San Francisco was also sued in federal court last month.
It was for a very similar law, yeah.
Yeah. The plaintiff in the earlier Sunnyvale lawsuit is a gun store owner. Who will be the plaintiff in this suit coming up next week?
Well, originally this suit was going to be filed a couple of weeks ago, and they were trying to line up a Sunnyvale police officer to be the plaintiff, because what they say is that this law does not have an exemption for law enforcement officers, and so they could become criminals if they have magazines with 10 or more rounds in their home for their personal use, not for on the job. And so they're looking for that kind of a plaintiff. I think they have now found one, and San Francisco, the NRA did the same thing. They found a retired police officer from the SFPD to file its lawsuit. So that's really the tack they're taking in attacking the law.
And Sunnyvale is a small city. Does it have money to defend itself in a suit like this?
That's a great question. It does. It really adds up. And you've seen San Francisco, Chicago sued, but there's a law firm has come forward to give them pro bono defense. So it's not going to come out of their general fund.
And just on a totally different topic now, we also have a field poll that has come out on organized labor as well. What is that showing?
Well, big reversal, and not a good one for organized labor. By 45 to 40%, Californians now say that unions do more harm than good in California. And so that's bad news for, obviously, organized labor, partly due, I think, to the BART strike has had a real negative impact here in the Bay Area. In fact, now a majority of people in the Bay Area think that transit strikes should be banned altogether. And so these are just a snapshot in time. I mean, it could change, but with issues like pension reform possibly coming up on the ballot next year, this is certainly something that, that labor unions and Democrats and as well as Republicans are going to be keeping a close eye on.
Well, it's certainly a tough issue for Democrats because they rely on labor unions for campaign donations, and labor unions are counting on them to protect their pensions and protect their right to strike.
Yep. So they kind of sink or swim together, but there could be a bit of a fissure developing between unions and the Democratic Party.
Okay, all very interesting. Thanks, Scott.
You bet.
And for all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.
I'm Scott Shafer. Thanks so much for joining us.
And I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.